I fight for the men I've held in my arms, dying on foreign soil. I fight for their wives and children whose names I heard whispered in their last breath. I fight for we few who did come home, only to find our country full of strangers wearing familiar faces. I fight for my people, impoverished to pay the debts of an empire too weak to rule them, yet brands them criminals for wanting to rule themselves. I fight so that all the fighting I've already done hasn't been for nothing. I fight because I must.
There exist many perceptions of history within the Elder Scrolls lore. There is no ultimate authority to tell us what is and what is not true. All we can do is gather the available sources and try to discern the clearest image. In many ways, this is not dissimilar to our real-world historical record collections, relying on the words of ancient men in ancient books. But history does not need to be ancient in order to be skewed. As the saying goes, history is written by the victor, and so it will be for the victor of the Skyrim Civil War. The key character here, who will either go down in history as a great high king or a treasonous swine, is the leader of the Stormcloaks, Ulfric, Jarl of Windhelm, and fighter for a free Skyrim. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Fudge Muppet. My name is Scott, and today we're going to be taking a look at one of the most divisive characters in Skyrim, Ulfric Stormcloak, son of Hogue, Jarl of Windhelm. Ulfric was born into the nobility of Skyrim around the year 150 of the Fourth Era, assuming he was a young adult by the time of the Great War, which makes sense given his middle-age appearance in the time of Skyrim. Whilst little is known of his early years, the skilled Nord was chosen by the respected Greybeards at High Hrothgar as a student. Here he spent 10 years training learning the power of the Thum, the ancient art of the voice used in reverence of the gods since the time of Jurgen Windcaller. We'd expect he'd be quite proud of this study, following in the footsteps of legendary Nords of old, but soon, violence ensnared Tamriel, and he could no longer sit idly by while the people suffered. The young Ulfric abandoned his study with the Greybeards when the Great War broke out in the 171st year of the Fourth Era, jumping at the opportunity to defend the Empire against the Old Merry Dominion. Even at this young age, Ulfric demonstrated qualities that would seem ideal for a leader of his people. At the time, the Empire were his people, his kinsmen, and as a patriot who believed in the Empire and what it stood for, he joined the struggle against the Thalmor's goal of restoring elven dominance. Ulfric fought alongside two other Skyrim-born Nords that you may know, who had a great love for the Empire, Galmar Stonefist and Rikke. Galmar Stonefist you would know as Ulfric's right-hand man, but Rikke, or should I say Legate Rikke, stood by the Empire and currently assists General Tullius in the governance of the land. Regardless of their current standings, these three fought in the Great War together, but prior to the Thalmor Lord Narafin's capture of the Imperial City, Ulfric was captured and imprisoned by the Aldmeri Dominion. After they found out who Ulfric was, heir to the hold of Eastmarch, they saw his value and sought to use him as an asset for future plans. He was assigned to a Thalmor interrogator who is now the first emissary Elenwen. This grueling torture was too much for the young man to handle, and to his great shame, he eventually broke and gave them information. However, in the meantime, Lord Narafin had already successfully taken the Imperial City, but in order to break Ulfric down further, they led him to believe that the information that he gave them helped them take the capital. Now, we have to remember here that Ulfric is only a young man at this point, and whilst it would be easy to say, if I were him, I wouldn't give up such information, but you really have to imagine what weeks of relentless torture, and potentially not even just physical torture, but magic torture as well, what it really involves. Honestly, there would not be many 18 or 20-year-olds that would be able to resist such intense torture. Regardless, this would be his hidden shame for the rest of his days, and in all honesty, it is likely this inner guilt that shapes his strong desire to free Skyrim, to have it independent from the Empire. To him, it may be some form of atonement, a way of ridding the guilt. It could also be argued that his hatred of the Empire is sourced from the very same shame. He feels incredibly guilty about the information given up to the Thalmor, and as a coping mechanism, he transforms that deep guilt into hatred of the Empire. That is not to say that his hatred of the imperial regime is not all justified. There is also the much more obvious factors at play here. But don't worry, I'm going to get into all of those after we finish explaining some more context. As seemingly part of an unknown plan, the Thalmor allowed Ulfric to escape his imprisonment and return to Skyrim. During the Great War, many soldiers and loyal men and women left their homes to fight in Cyrodiil and Hammerfell, leaving their homes with fewer forces to stand guard. Markarth is one area of Skyrim in particular where this could be a very dangerous situation. You see, the natives of the Reach, the aptly named Reachmen, have always been a problem for the lands of Markarth, and it's during this Great War that a group of Reachmen, later known as the Forsworn, rallied together under the leadership of their king Madanach and seized the city from the Nords. For 2 years during the Great War, they ruled Markarth. To solidify their conquest, the Forsworn sought to have the Reach recognized as an independent kingdom with the Empire, but this was obviously undesirable to the Nords. Unable to call on troops from the war, Hrolfdir, the Jarl of Markarth, engaged the service of Ulfric and his militia in order to retake the hold. In the Forsworn uprising, Ulfric earned his new title as the Bear of Markov. The bards would say he was a giant of a man equal to that of Tiber Septim in his cunning, leadership, and decisive actions. Arianus Arius, the imperial scholar, on the contrary, writes that the actions on this day were far from heroic. Before a peace treaty could be resolved with the Forsworn, a militia led by Ulfric Stormcloak sieged the gates of their capital, Markarth. What happened during that battle was war, but what happened after the battle was nothing short of war crimes. Every official who worked for the Forsworn was put to the sword, even after they had surrendered. Native women were tortured to give up the names of Forsworn fighters who had fled the city or were in the hills of the Reach. Anyone who lived in the city, Forsworn and Nord alike, were executed if they had not fought with Ulfric and his men when they breached the gates. You are with us, or you are against Skyrim. This could very well be the truth, though one must consider that it could be an imperial embellishment in order to discourage people from following Ulfric. Regardless of how it really happened, the fact was that Ulfric had retaken the city of Markarth from the Forsworn, but he was not yet prepared to let go of it. The wounds of the White Gold Concordat were still fresh, and Talos worship had been outlawed, but it hadn't really taken full effect in Skyrim. Before Ulfric handed the reins of Markarth back to Hrolfdir, and by extension imperial control, he only did so on the condition that the free Talos worship would be allowed in Markarth. Until now, the Imperial Legion hadn't been strictly enforcing the law, but this kind of incident allowed the Thalmor to apply pressure and demand strict adherence to the White Gold Concordat. The Empire reneged on their agreement with Ulfric, and he was then arrested and imprisoned. The Markarth Incident, as this event would come to be known, played out exactly as the Thalmor wanted. While Ulfric was in prison, his father Hogue, the Bear of Eastmarch, passed away, and his eulogy had to be delivered via a letter smuggled out of prison in secret. This solemn situation did the Empire no good in the eyes of Ulfric.
I, his only son, forced to deliver his eulogy via letter I had smuggled out of prison. Such is the love of Titus meat for his subjects.
I ultimately think this is what truly sealed his hatred for the Empire. Look at the world from his point of view. First, he joins the Empire in the war against the Old Merry Dominion as a young adult. He was then captured and tortured by the Thalmor. He gives up information after no longer being able to take it, and then he is led to believe that what he spilled allowed the Imperial City to be taken. He feels a deeply ingrained guilt for this. When he returns to Skyrim, he frees Markarth from the Forsworn and is told that in return for Markarth, his request for Talos worship is allowed. But then the Imperials turn around and betray him, throwing him in prison. So he fought for the Empire, was tortured during his service, frees Markarth for the Empire, and then is thrown in jail for worshipping Talos, the divine form of Tiber Septim, the very man who started the Empire, like some heretic scumbag. On the top of that, he had to smuggle out a letter to his father's funeral, not being allowed to attend himself, and now Skyrim itself is policed by Thalmor Justiciars. This is where his inner guilt transforms into an inflamed hatred of the Empire, and like I mentioned before, this could be in part a coping mechanism, a way to destroy his inner shame by fighting the Empire. But we will talk more on this later in the video about how the Thalmor plan to use their so-called asset in the form of Ulfric. When finally released from prison, he returned to Windhelm, and Ulfric's resolve was stronger than ever to remove the Empire's control in Skyrim.
I returned to Windhelm and was greeted by a city in mourning, at one with my own grief and anger, clamoring in angry voices, calling out for justice, for war. They sat me on the throne of Ysgramor, the throne of my father. I only hope I can prove worthy of that honor.
Though Ulfric's return to Windhelm doesn't seem to be good for all. It's worth noting here that Ulfric seems to care little for the plight of those who cannot claim Nordic blood. The Grey Quarter in Windhelm is one such example, with the Dunmer living in squalor. However, Frigleth Horsebreaker says in The Scourge of the Grey Quarter, "The respectable families of the city, the Cruel Seas and the Shadowshields speak with an utmost parental affection for the Argonians in their employ, but the Dark Elves have made no effort to integrate or assimilate themselves to the proper city dwellers. There is cause for optimism though, as Jarl Ulfric is not nearly so tolerant of these substandard beings as his fathers were. Indeed, the soft hand of Hogue can be seen in the city's Argonian population as well. The fishmen, at least, have learned how to best contribute to their new home. They have proven themselves as models, toiling at the docks with utmost efficiency and bright smiles. It would do the Dark Elves well to pay heed to their scaly cousins. I would expect in due course that they will find themselves either contributing more directly or once again wandering the land in search of roof and warmth." Then again, this is a rather biased look at things when you consider that it's very hard for a Dunmer to integrate into a society that threatens them with physical violence on the regular, as evidenced by the encounter when you first walk into Windhelm. And the Argonians also stay outside the city walls, outside the way of Nords who may not like lizards in their city. It would seem that in an independent Skyrim, racial tensions are very, very likely. But let's get back on track. The death of High King Islod gave Ulfric the opportunity he needed to raise his desires for Skyrim's independence with the other Jarls. As dictated by tradition, a meeting of the representatives from each hold in Skyrim, the Moot, was convened in order to decide the successor to the throne. Torrig, son of Islod, was named the new High King, a young Nord with great respect for Ulfric's military history and political ideals. This, however, ends tragically. Ulfric's path into action was cemented when he went to visit Torrig in solitude. The High King and his advisors expected this visit to be a proposal on an independent Skyrim, and being sympathetic to this, Torrig welcomed him with open arms. It is entirely possible that Torrig would have seriously considered independence, but instead Ulfric challenged Torrig to the battle for the throne under ancient Nordic tradition. Torrig had been given a terrible ultimatum. If he did not accept, he would have been considered a coward not fit for the throne of Skyrim, proving Ulfric's point, and if he accepted, then he would be outmatched by Ulfric's superiority in battle, as well as his thumb. So Torrig had to accept the challenge. Drawing his power, Ulfric knocked the king to the ground with a thumb before killing him with his sword. Rumours circulated afterwards that this thumb literally tore the king apart, doing little more to improve the image of the deed. It is a sad tale, and one can only imagine a world where Ulfric had more patience and Torrig had listened to him, claiming independence without civil war. To the Stormcloaks, this was considered a fair duel of ancient tradition, proving the king's weakness. To the Empire and its loyalists, it was nothing but an assassination. Regardless of how you see it, Ulfric fled solitude safely, returning to Windhelm. With a rift in the political climate in Skyrim due to the death of High King Torrig, Ulfric gathered support from across the realm. He called on the true sons and daughters of Skyrim to join him in rebellion, with the Jarls of the Rift, Winterhold and the Pale backing his claim. Thus began the Skyrim Civil War, a conflict that would deeply affect the province of Skyrim. The supporters of Ulfric embraced the name Stormcloaks, initially used by detractors to belittle the movement. Instead, they saw it as taking the name of their true High King. The escalating conflict in Skyrim gathered the attention of the Empire, sending General Tullius to help lead the Imperial forces in the region. The forces previously were quite disorganized, but the influence and guidance of Tullius strengthened their presence. The Imperials managed to capture Ulfric in an ambush at Darkwater Crossing, and hastily moved him to Helgen for a swift execution. This is where the now iconic introduction scene of Skyrim fits into the story of Ulfric Stormcloak. As we all know, Ulfric escaped his fate in the chaos of Alduin's re-emergence. Escaping from death at Imperial hands, he then returned to Windhelm, continuing his fight with renewed vigour. Over the course of the war, Ulfric continued to lead his Stormcloaks in their conflict against Imperials for Skyrim's independence. After his escape from Helgen, the appearance of the last Dragonborn would mean a powerful ally or powerful enemy, depending on whichever side they chose to assist. While we don't have a true canon ending for Skyrim, Ulfric's life will go one of two ways. Ulfric and his rebellion meet their end in the battle for Windhelm. The Imperials mount their offensive action on Ulfric's base of operations under the lead of General Tullius, confronting Ulfric in the Palace of Kings. He refuses to yield to Tullius and the Dragonborn, declaring that he'll never surrender Skyrim into the hands of a corrupt and dying empire. With the killing blow dealt, Imperial victory is secured and Ulfric's soul is bound for Sovngarde. Alternatively, Ulfric's rebellion may succeed when he launches an attack on Solitude. The battle culminates in the death of both General Tullius and Rikke, bringing his patriotic campaign to a climactic victory for the Nords, allowing them to return to their glory and traditions and determine their own future. Upholding tradition, Ulfric refuses to crown himself High King until a time that the moot could be convened to make their decision. While he has enough political sense to wait for the moot, he's under no illusion that his coronation will be the end product. He says, "We'll wait for the moot to name me High King. It'll be better for all that way." And he also says, "But that doesn't mean I won't start acting like it. There's much to do." But here's where it gets interesting. The Thalmor dossier that you can find in the Thalmor embassy clearly refers to Ulfric as an asset, which to some gives them the impression that he is some kind of secret, dormant double agent for the Thalmor. But I believe this is a misinterpretation. Ulfric Stormcloak is clearly, vehemently against the Thalmor and its dominion, and he truly believes in his cause. As stated in the dossier, it is strategic for the Thalmor to have Ulfric fight the civil war against the Empire, destabilizing the region, preventing the Empire as a whole from recuperating its forces. For them, this is the ideal situation. However, if Ulfric did manage to claim an independent Skyrim and be named its High King, while not ideal for the Thalmor, they would seem to have a contingency plan in place. By strategically disseminating the information that Ulfric cracked under torture, which led to the taking of the Imperial City, even though that's not true, and additionally, Ulfric believes this to be true, they could absolutely destroy his reputation, which could potentially take a newly united Skyrim and break it down again on the premise that its new High King is a coward and a traitor. While this is not guaranteed to work, it is a backup plan for the Thalmor. In the dossier, it also mentions that direct contact remains a possibility under extreme circumstances. What I think could be meant by this is that under the non-ideal circumstances where Skyrim becomes united under a High King Ulfric, they could make direct contact with him and essentially threaten to expose him as a coward and traitor unless he complies with their demands. Maybe that could involve him blocking Imperial trade routes to High Rock or actively harassing the Empire. Who knows? Anyways, the canon here is not yet decided. We likely won't know which side of the conflict will win the Civil War until a future installment of the Elder Scrolls series continues the timeline. There is an interesting question here though. Which side winning makes for a more interesting Tamriel? Ulfric may truly have died for the cause, opening up Skyrim completely to the Thalmor's influence through the Empire. Alternatively, Ulfric could go on to being crowned High King, leading an independent Skyrim, succeeding in their struggle against an imperial regime. Ultimately, Ulfric's legacy is one of deep love for his country and a desire for autonomy from foreign powers. But it would not be fair to say that there is no ego involved, especially considering that his hatred for the Empire and desire to prove himself comes from the deeply held secret that is his shame. Additionally, one must consider that Ulfric has also caused much pain and violence, the brutality at the Markov Incident, the killing of High King Torrig, and of course, the war itself that he started. Love him or hate him, the legacy of the Bear of Markov plays an integral part in the shaping of Skyrim's future. And that's all for this one, ladies and gentlemen, the story of Ulfric Stormcloak and his rebellion that sparked a civil war. What do you think is the more interesting end result for Skyrim in the series moving forward? A Skyrim entirely under the control of Nords, rejecting external influence of the Thalmor, or perhaps a Skyrim more open to the world, under the ordered control of the Empire? Thanks so much for watching, be sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed, and be sure to subscribe for more great Elder Scrolls content just like this. As always, social media links are in the description below. Thanks again, my name is Scott, and I look forward to nerding out with you again next time.